Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and this month our guest, State Representative Chris Hendricks, joining us today.
Jim,
good to see you again.
Always good to see you. Always good to be here.
Belated Happy New Year for crying out loud.
Likewise.
You know, haven't seen you since last year when we did
Been
this.
a busy time.
Lots going on. Last time we talked, obviously, was right about election time for you.
Was that when it was?
Right before Election Day. Yep. Obviously, you won re-election.
Yes.
New district.
No opponent.
True. No district. Still, it's a win's a win.
Right.
You know. So now you're getting your feet wet with the new district, as you were talking about the last time we chatted, getting acclimated with everything.
Yep.
How's it going?
It's going good. It's going great, actually. As you know, I do not have a Acushnet any longer, which is unfortunate in some ways for sure. But being from New Bedford and having the district exclusively in New Bedford is just it's awesome, and it's I couldn't have asked for anything better. I couldn't have asked for a better district, quite frankly. The district includes a majority of the port of New Bedford, I think down to Homer's Wharf, and most of the lower north end, all of Ward 2, precinct A, B, C, D, and F1, which is a sub-precinct in Ward 3, and then I have A, B, C, D, and F in Ward 4. And also a sub-precinct, F.
It's amazing.
A or F1, whatever they call it.
Is it? And I don't want to say this bad or anything. Is it easier just having one community that you represent?
I mean, so far, in theory, I would think it would be, but thus far it has been. It's one less entity you have to consult when for budget amendments, for any type of legislation that is on anyone's radar. And obviously, being born and raised in New Bedford, it's just great to be entirely in the city, and jumping in feet first with I have a good relationship with most of the city councilors, so that's certainly important. But it certainly makes my work easier in many ways.
And again, like you were just saying, it's moved your district in a sense has moved south, if you will, in east.
Yep.
In the city, so there's more of downtown and that.
Yeah, mostly all of downtown.
Right.
So it's great, and obviously I worked about 10 years or so at court bartending in New Bedford, so I got to be part of that kind of transition from, and Senator Montigny was a part of revitalizing downtown, so I saw that firsthand. So it's really, so I have a good understanding on the issues facing the downtown area, and hopefully we'll get the same type of progress going in the lower north end area and along the avenue. Right. With the TDI district now.
Before we get into some topics, I wanted to ask too, because with the new session starting, new committee assignments, although as you said, not really any new committees for you per se. One new one, a couple of the same ones.
Yep. So actually, technically, they're all three of the same committees that I was on, but just one of which I'm now a vice chair, which is the Federal Stimulus and Oversight Committee. That has to do with any type of ARPA spending, any type of federal money we get related to, ARPA is basically anything COVID related at the time. So we got, at the time of that federal allocation, we got about $8 billion, $5 billion of which we had to allocate. And so about 1.8 billion of which we have left to allocate.
And when do you have to spend that by?
We have to have it
earmarked, I should say.
Earmarked by the end of 24 and spent down by the end of 26. So we have a few years, and I'm sure we'll have some interesting committee hearings, listening to testimony from residents, stakeholders on how probably a lot of municipalities on how best to spend that money down. We don't have as much money as we did when we first started, obviously. The first big bill was in December of 21, where we spent probably about close to $2 billion of that. And then with the economic development bill, we spent a little more. So I'm not really sure how if we're gonna do it all in one big chunk or kind of spread it out over several spending bills. But certainly it'd be nice to have a larger voice and to decide how we spend that money, and ultimately we have to make recommendations to House Ways and Means on they're the final say for sure, but as you know, but it'll be interesting to be able to make those recommendations.
And you're still on Judiciary?
Still on Judiciary,
which you've loved,
which I love. Being an attorney, it's whenever I spoke to the Speaker about committee assignments, I always said, I don't care where you put me, I just want to stay on judiciary, because I just love that. It's the most compelling work that I've done, I think, in the legislature thus far. And housing.
Which is a huge, which you and I have talked about previously. This is and
I'm hoping we'll
keeps
talk
getting
a little
worse,
bit about
you know,
today. But yeah, it's certainly an issue that's on a lot of people's front burners, especially the administration. So I would imagine that we're going to be seeing a lot of bills go through that, a lot of contested, compelling testimony that we're going to hear at that committee.
It all starts obviously with the budget. The governor just released her budget a few days ago. I guess your original thoughts, because knowing the budget process, she puts it out, you guys put yours out, the Senate puts theirs out, and then everybody works together in the conference committee and hopefully has it done by July 1st. But what are your initial impressions of at least of the governors?
Well, I was glad to see some of the substantive stuff that we put through in the House last session that we weren't able to get it across the finish line at the end of the year, at the end of the session. The no-cost prison phone calls. She allocated some money for, I think, $20 million or so. From what I hear, that's not that much for that. So I know that was a big priority for the House is to get some prison reform going on that end, having prisoners be able to keep contact with family members so they're not just kicked to the wind when they get out. So that was interesting. I wasn't sure whether or not that was going to be how that was going to come about, but it was good to see that substantive thing in her budget. Also, she has money for free community college.
It's been getting a lot of play in the press,
which was very interesting. I think again that's only a small chunk. It's only about 20 or 30 million.
And it's for certain people, my understanding, 25 and
25
older.
plus.
Right.
And I think there's provisions that would, aim it towards low-income folks. And I guess the idea substantively and policy on a policy level is to get those folks who have some credits of college under their belt and never got around to it. We all know, I could name a dozen people that I know personally who have, went to school for a semester and a half and never finished, and now they're in debt. So this would be a good way to get those folks back into school and back in an upward mobility relative to education. And as you know, community college level has a lot of relevant, tangible job skills training. So I think that's a great place to start. I'm certainly for that. Making it easier for people to get back and finish to get an associate's. So that's interesting. I'm not sure where the House leadership or the House as a whole stands on that. So that will be yet to be determined.
Is it harder for an issue like that where obviously in your district you get Bristol Community College right here in the city, although it's based in Fall River, but it's here in the city.
Big presence.
When there are other districts where the community college isn't that interwoven to the cities.
I would imagine the communities that don't have many low-income folks either would be not as
receptive
anxious
to
get something like that done. Being in Massachusetts, I think regardless of the communities, I think that's probably something we could get done. But I'm optimistic about it. You always hear the comparisons to Newton and Wellesley and all those areas that don't necessarily have the challenges that gateway cities have. So we'll see. I think it'd be interesting to hear the debates on that moving forward.
But it's interesting too because you're seeing press-wise and what have you that colleges there's less kids in college right now. After the pandemic, kids aren't applying or they're not going back or what have you. That there's just less people in colleges right now.
Right, and I think that ties into the legislature's push to get vocational training more widespread and beefed up, and more people in the vocational high schools. Admissions, whether it be admissions policies or curriculum. There's such relevant education and vocational training, and I think that's a great place to. So it might be tied into that, and so we'll see. There's a lot of question marks moving out of the pandemic for sure, and I think that's one of them.
A lot of issues, obviously. The budget. I've always said there's no one thing that impacts people more than the state budget. And
Agreed.
People don't grasp it. It's not a sexy topic or whatever, but it impacts everybody. We kind of touched upon it in the start, but housing and sort of healthcare issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, are those things do you see in the budget right now, or is that something
I don't
that's
see anything to pinpoint in the governor's budget that, I'm sure she's allocated money for housing and to beef up raft and things,
Right.
those types of programs. But I think if you're going to see anything this session, it'll probably be on the more substantive side, outside of the budget, I would think. There's a lot of talk about rent stabilization or rent control, however you want to call it, and there's a lot of misconceptions about that policy as well. I think we could do a lot with tenant protections relative to low-income folks, upfront costs, moving into a new place, being able to spread first, last, and security over the first 6 months of a tenancy, things like that. And so certainly there's going to be a lot of discussion, I think, around housing, particularly in the gateway cities and specifically in New Bedford, given the fact that we're going to have the two MBTA stations. One of which will be right in the heart of town. That will certainly going to raise rents.
Well, that's the thing too. It's not just housing that you're talking about. It's affordable housing for folks right now. It's sort of a double-edged sword. I mean,
right. Actually, in relative to housing, in the governor's budget, the HDIP program. If you recall, one of the main complaints that we had as a legislature, at least Tony Cabral and I, was there wasn't enough funding for HDIP, which is basically allows gateway cities to create market rate housing, which is a great way to generate economic activity in ways that affordable housing and low-income housing doesn't. And so we've always been proponents of getting that money, more money in that program, and she allocated, I think, $50 million. And I think in the past we've advocated to try to get $30 million. So that was awesome to see that she put a lot of money into the HDIP program. Again, I don't know what the House budget side is going to look like, and I hope it's close to that. But certainly that's a very promising thing, especially for a gateway city like New Bedford.
When you look at housing, or just generally the topic, and you talk about it with legislators or the mayor or what have you, how much can you really impact?
It's tough
because it is a market-based.
It's exactly right. It's a market-based function.
Yeah.
So there are things we can do relative to rent stabilization. And I'll basically, so when people hear rent control, they think, oh, the legislature is going to control how much you can charge for rent, which absolutely is not the case. What the rent stabilization provisions people are talking about now in the legislature have to deal with how much a landlord can raise rents once a tenant is already in. So, for example, say I have a year-long lease where I'm paying $1,500 a month. If we had rent stabilization provision, for example, it doesn't allow the landlord to raise more than 5%.
It's a percentage based thing.
For moving forward into the next tenancy. So basically, at 5%, if your rent is $1,500, your landlord would only be able to rent it next term up to $1,575. That 5% increase obviously would probably be a point of contention. It should be 5, should it be 10?
Right.
You could probably, if you see anything come across the line, it would probably be, I would imagine, be a little higher than 5. At 10%, you're looking at $150 increase. And so I think that's what we're dealing with now on a tangible level is a lot of people are being now priced out of their homes because people are raising rents on them.
Interest rates are up, so it's hard to buy a house.
And inflation is tied into that as well.
Yep.
And for a while, the prices of homes were going up, so people thought they could just raise rents, and a lot of people were left in the cold, literally and figuratively. So that's something to look out for.
And it's kind of on the same token, because this is something you and I have chatted with in the past too, but it's interesting now that you're dealing with the budget. I mean, you look at the price of colleges. Mm-hmm. The cost of college keeps going up too, and it's the same sort of issues that you're facing. And the reality is, what can, in a sense, the legislature do to control costs? And no matter what the issue is, you're limited in what you can do.
Yeah, especially on that level. And with higher education, it almost doesn't make sense for someone to go to college sometimes these days. But when you see the amount it costs per semester, it's just astronomical. I know that the governor's budget, she allocated a lot of money for higher education. I think somewhere of the 300 something million. So I don't know how that is going to look in the end, how that's going to be spent, whether it just is helping people with tuition or what have you. But she certainly devoted a lot of money to higher ed, pre-K, trying to get universal pre-K across the board, and K through 12.
Well, one of the smaller things that you folks did too was extend the school lunch program.
Yes. We just did that this past week. We extended that.
That the free lunch continues, and obviously I think in kind of what you were saying earlier, in a district, in a gateway city, that's hugely important versus in a town that may not have that issue.
But so luckily we didn't have much pushback from the folks who aren't in the gateway cities on that, and I think it was Rep. Vargas is a big champion of that up at the State House, and thankfully so. So and it takes the stigma a lot when you have more kids eligible for free lunch. It kind of takes the stigma out of so and so is getting a free lunch. And, so I think it helps on many ways, providing that resource to kids in the schools.
Turning our attention, I guess, one of the things that you've been dealing with and we've talked about, but it keeps moving on, and you represent now a good chunk of the port. You just signed on to Senator Moran's legislation, the Blue Economy.
In Lenatra, Lenatra's bill, yep.
Yep. Lots in that legislation, and lots that would impact the city or the port.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I just had a meeting with the Port of New Bedford, the folks at the port, and this, as you know, there's so much going on at the port. We have the North Terminal, we have the Revere Copper site, we have the Mass CEC site, we have the Foss Terminal, we have the State Pier that's eventually going to be developed. So when you consider all the factors relative to the blue economy, which for those who don't know, it has anything to do economically around the ocean, whether it be commercial fishing, offshore wind, science and technology, research relative to keeping our oceans from warming, climate change, things of that nature. So we have a huge interest in making sure we're on the forefront of all those things. So this legislation, basically big picture view, creates grant programs for any type of blue economy entity, whether it be nonprofit, business, or otherwise governmental, to receive money to shore up their activity and making sure that the blue economy stays strong. There's obviously going to be a big balance with commercial fishing on the port. So hopefully something gets over the finish line this session relative to the blue economy.
Do you expect? I mean, I would assume the legislation covers, as you said, a lot of things. Do you think some might be in, some might be out? There's going to be some play with how the final...
I can't imagine that there'd be too much pushback. If certainly considering that Ron Mariano, the Speaker of the House, said last session that he wants the South Coast to be the hub of offshore wind, which obviously is included in the blue economy. So I'm not sure, so long as he's there and spearheading that, I don't think that there should be much pushback. It's a big coast of Massachusetts. You have the South Coast, Cape Cod, South Shore, North Shore, and obviously Boston. And plus, from our area, New Bedford, workforce training development is huge. So a lot of those bills deal with getting money and education into younger folks in schools, get them educated on what the blue economy is, what type of work is going to be available. So hopefully we can tie that into the vocational schools and get younger folks energized in local and get them ready to be part of the workforce, because it's going to be an industry that's starting, and it's going to be growing and growing, hopefully. And
you guys have already worked out relationships with Bristol Community College,
right? And there's pieces in there in those legislations that would apply to
like Mass Maritime too is in there.
Yep, would apply to available money for entities like that, and especially BCC, what they're doing with the NAUI Institute down on the port, the training facility that they're getting going. So yeah, the blue economy is huge. I know the former Ward 3 councilor Hugh Dunn was big on that when he was working with UMass. That was years ago. So this is certainly something that's been on our radars for a long time.
Touch upon while we're talking about the port and the wind industry. where do we stand as far as the projects right now go? I mean, you read in the paper about Avangard and their contract, and they're having issues. From where you sit, and you certainly know more inside baseball than I do on this, where do we stand with the projects? I mean, it seems like the port is still going ahead with all these things.
The port is still going ahead. There's a lot of development on the port that kind of is not really directly based on any types of specific contracts. You know, all the ports that are being developed in anticipation of something coming along, regardless of what those contracts look like. The Vineyard Wind contract, that procurement is already far enough along where they're not really involved in trying to push back on any of the contract provisions. That's mostly Commonwealth, and behind them, Mayflower, which used to be Mayflower, is now South Coast Wind. And so, to be honest with you, Jim, it really depends on how the administration handles it. You know, there's a lot of talk about them just saying, you know, a contract's a contract, and you got to, conduct yourself according to those terms. So we'll see. I mean, and like I told you before, I mean, these are sophisticated business people. You know, inflation, supply chain issues, interest rates, those are all things that should have been considered. And a lot of those things that have kind of cooled down. So hopefully they stay that way. But so long as the economy slowly gets better, those arguments that they have less force.
But for the layman who doesn't understand the intricacies of it, I mean, you're still going to see offshore wind development taking place on the ports.
Absolutely.
Sooner rather than later, I think.
Sooner rather than later. And like I said, I just had a meeting with the Port of New Bedford, and they're getting, they had some graphics on what it's going to look like when the turbine blades start coming, and you're going to see a lot of development, especially at the Mass CEC port, with the staging area for the turbines and the blades. So it's going to be exciting stuff. So the contract disputes that are happening now, I don't anticipate are going to ultimately be are going to handicap us in any way.
Because I know that the expectation was, I think the last time you heard we were talking about, hopefully, actually, maybe later this year, or definitely by next year.
Yeah, I think late 2023, you'll start seeing some real
activity. Yeah.
on the port. And it's great. You just saw on the Foss terminal, they demolished that smokestack in the old was it General what building? Whatever
Eversource,
building. Whatever that building was on the Eversource property, but the building itself. So that's interesting to see. It's just a lot going, and it's a lot of ports being developed, especially the Quinn port, the old Copper Revere site. That are going to be multi-use, not necessarily offshore wind. It's going to be for commercial fishing. In that, the North Terminal in particular doesn't really have any defined use as of yet. Assuming that's going to have a lot of offshore wind stuff, but you never know. It could have a lot of recreational stuff, commercial fishing. So there's a lot of uses around these ports that you're going to be seeing once they're done. It's going to be exciting.
And State Pier, I know there's been proposals that we've talked about. But plans, I guess, are on the table right now.
As far as I know, yes. As far as I don't know how the new administration is going to want to get involved in any way, but that is close to being a done deal, and it's going to be developed. I forgot the percentages, but part of it's going to be retail and and restaurant. Closer to the Route 18 side. So it's going to look a whole lot different. Especially in like I said before, I bartended at Cork for years, and I used to stare at that pier all day long some days. So it's going to be interesting to see.
And you look at the businesses that have been down there, whether it be the Black Whale or Merrill's, or businesses have succeeded on that location.
Right, already without all this activity. So I would imagine you're going to see a lot more restaurants pop up, a lot more cafes, a lot more eateries, bars, most likely. You see the La France folks developing the old on the corner, the property on the corner,
right.
The National Club, what I was trying to say. So that's going to be interesting. Looks like it's going to have a restaurant or some type of retail on the bottom, and then apartments above. So it's just not even the port stuff. It's going to be a different look downtown. I know that there's some issues with parking, so I know getting additional parking will certainly be a priority. I know it's not a very sexy topic, but part of the Foss terminal has a portion devoted that's will remain within city control. So I think that will probably be developed into some sort of parking structure, and maybe on the Whale's Tooth parking lot as well.
We've got a couple minutes left. I'm just kind of curious. I was just thinking this now as you're talking about it with your district now. There's so many mom and pop businesses, small businesses there that are impacted and what have you. From your standpoint, how are you looking to help them right now? I know everybody has their own issues and stuff, but in general, when you're looking at the small mom and pop, one owner businesses, what are some of the things that you want to try to help them with?
Well, I mean, just the more activity you have on the port, the more people there are, and the more people, the more successful those places will be. Small business generally means, in that downtown area, restaurants. And for the past 10, 15 years, small restaurant industry in downtown New Bedford has been booming. And I know firsthand. So I would imagine those small restaurants, small coffee shops will only flourish more as the activity on the port gets going.
And it shows how much business the port generates, the ancillary businesses that the port generates, a healthy port generates too.
Right.
That you're going to
and that's always been the case, with the fishing industry alone. But those bars over the years have been, can be a little darker in many ways. So hopefully we're beyond that stage, and the restaurants and the new small businesses that pop up will be there and flourish and be there for a long, long time.
Got a minute left. Just want to touch base. What's coming up for you in the next couple weeks here for you? Anything that look forward to?
We're just getting back in session, so probably next week we'll be starting our committee hearings with the judiciary and with the I'm not sure about the Federal Stimulus and Oversight Committee, whether that's going to have any hearings soon, but certainly judiciary is going to be a very, very busy
Any big issue
session.
that you
with the New York v. Bruin decision out of the Supreme Court last year. I'm sure there's going to be a push, bills filed, and I know, in fact, there have been bills filed about tweaking the gun laws relative to safety and training to kind of combat that decision that the New York v. Bruin decision carried out, which basically took the discretion out of the police chiefs in municipalities to award licenses to carry. So hopefully we'll be looking at those laws.
It's good seeing you again.
Likewise.
A lot on the plate, that's for sure.
Yeah, it went by quick.
So we will be, by the next time we chat will be in the summertime, so you can update us on how at least the start of the session went here, and we'll go from there.
Look forward to it.
All right. State Representative Chris Hendricks has been our guest. My thanks to him. My thanks to you for watching us. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too
Hey, sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew. A girl so smart, so responsible. She must be a keeper.
Have you ever seen somebody treated unfairly because of the color of their skin?
Do you guys know what it means to have white privilege?
What is racism and what do you think about it?